Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley. I'd like to introduce you to my esteemed co-host, who had to climb 5 flights of stairs to get here. And the ecstatic gaucho does not climb 5 flights of stairs. But that's who he is. He's Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. He's done it tonight. And I think Jonathan would like to introduce. We have a very, very special guest on the show tonight. Jonathan,
Yes.
introduce Bradley for us.
Well, we have Brad, who's here all the way from Canada. Well,
Hello.
virtually.
Thank you. Yes, across the pond, as it's often, as I hear the Brits say.
That's what we call it. Yeah. You didn't have to get on a plane anyway. That's
No, that's true. That's true. I didn't have to get on a plane, but it is earlier here, so I'm actually seeing you guys from the future. How weird is that?
5 hours in the future. Yes.
great.
So, Brad, you live in my old stomping ground of TO Toronto there.
I do. I live here in Toronto, where I'm a artist, and I live here with my partner in our cozy apartment.
Brilliant.
Lovely.
And so, aside from you do fine art, and you're also a filmmaker. You and your partner have made several short films together as well.
Yeah, we have a production company together, and we've made a handful of short films. I think it's like maybe between 6 or 8. I cannot remember. Actually, I'll have to ask him. But yeah, before the pandemic, we were really active of making a bunch of short films, and sort of right now we're working on like a feature screenplay. So because one of our short films we'd like to make into a bigger thing. But since the pandemic, I have also been focusing on my fine art, and there's a gallery outside Toronto in this beautiful area called Prince Edward County, which has a lot of like wineries and antiques and stuff. It's really like a nice touristy area for getting out of the city. So there's a gallery just outside Picton, Maison de Poivre, who's been representing my work. So I've been really, focusing on my fine art, my painting, my drawing, and I'm also attending school right now too at the Academy of Realist Art here in Toronto. So it's been fun.
Brilliant. And you can share some links with us, and we'll share those with our listeners so they can go and check out some of your work. Because you did some amazing, sometimes you post on Facebook and things, you post some of your work, and you do some amazing paintings and stuff. So
thank you.
I'm sure lots of people would like to have a look at those.
For sure. I'll share those.
Brilliant. But tonight, our theme of the show was the artistic impulse. And we couldn't think of anyone better to come and talk about that than an actual artist.
I'm honored.
So we've picked a couple of really great films to talk about tonight. As a matter of fact, one of them is perhaps one of the greatest films of all time, really.
It is.
So
I would agree with that.
We've got a lot to talk about tonight and dig into. What we're going to do, though, first, we're not going to go in chronological order tonight because one of the films is such a monumental sort of work, sort of a key work in cinema, we thought it would be better to focus on that on the second half of the show.
Sure.
So at first, Jonathan, do you want to just introduce the film? You selected this one, I believe,
Yes.
to go along with the theme tonight. And it was one I hadn't seen before, so I was very keen to see it because I remember hearing about it, but I'd never had a chance to see it. So when Jonathan...
I'm in the same boat. I heard about this film and I had never seen it. So, yeah.
Well, it's a really interesting film, and it's really great. So, Jonathan, you want to tell us a little bit about the first film tonight?
Yes, the first film is Pollock, as in the painter Jackson Pollock. And it's directed by Ed Harris, who stars in it as the eponymous Pollock himself. and it came out in the year 2000. I went to see it in the sort of cinema when it came out with a friend who is sort of a big Pollock fan, I think, or definitely a sort of artist as well, and somebody who's thought, and we both really enjoyed it at the time, and I thought, it's a good film. There was one of the performances was nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah, I think Marisha Gay Harden actually won the Oscar.
Yeah, she did. She won it. Sorry, yeah. There was actually 2 nominations and one winning. Ed Harris was nominated as well, but he didn't win. Yeah. But yeah, Marisha Gay Harden won. But I guess, it's not like it's not a sort of blockbuster. Let's put it like that. Mm-hmm. But and for probably most people, it just sort of they didn't even spot it when it came out, unless you're really into your movies. And but I think it's a great film, and so that's why I chose it.
It is one of those films that kind of slipped under the radar a little bit.
That's the phrase.
I think Ed Harris, it's his one and only featured
directing job, I think.
Is that right? I don't think he's done anything else.
Well, it's according to, I looked at his Wikipedia page, of course, and basically it did say that he'd directed another, but it's basically as a Disney film. So, Appaloosa. It's a Western. No, it's not. Perhaps it's not Disney. It's a Western called Appaloosa, which he.
Is that the one with? That's a really good film as well. Actually, I really like that one.
Viggo Mortensen.
Viggo Mortensen, yeah. But yeah, it's quite an accomplished film, Pollock, and I was quite impressed with it. Jackson Pollock, I obviously was only ever familiar with him on a very kind of high level. Obviously I'd heard of him and I was familiar with the type of work that he did and why he was famous, but I didn't really know a lot about his background and his life story. So for me, this film was really, really interesting in that sense as well, because it was a real eye-opener for me just to learn a little bit more about him.
Mm.
So how about you, Brad? What did you think? It was a first time viewing for you as well.
Yeah, so this was a movie that it's every Oscar season you kind of have like a movie that maybe it wins just like one award for acting or something, and it's kind of known for like that one thing. And this was sort of like in that bucket where like I knew that Marisha Gay Harden had won for Best Actress, Supporting Actress, and I heard that she was really good in it. But sometimes these movies kind of drift from public attention. These aren't like one of the big winners that everybody sort of remembers, right? So of movies. So this was my first viewing of this one as well too, and it was interesting because I knew Jackson Pollock just from in high school when we had to like study, in high school. My last 2 years of art class in high school, they kind of did like the entirety of art history. And like, as we got to the end, we got to the abstract artists and stuff. And so Jackson Pollock and his splatter technique was a big one that sort of stood out. And I remember going to MoMA, my first time, and just seeing his works, and they're enormous, right? So then that's something that doesn't really come across when I'm learning about them in school, is just how immersive these paintings are. And I knew that he sort of struggled with substance abuse, alcoholism, and I guess something I learned in this film too is that it's connected to mental health issues as well. So it was just interesting to see something that filled in the blanks of what I didn't know. I really liked seeing the world of like Peggy Guggenheim and how he was like in her orbit, and along with other artists, right? Like she was championing and supporting to really make New York this sort of center for this hub for the abstract expressionists.
Mm.
It was slightly reminded me of a film we discussed earlier, Reds, the Warren Beatty film. And Reds is sort of set in this sort of, I guess it's political, but also an artistic milieu in sort of New York. So this is almost like sort of 30 years after Reds, but the sort of I'm sure there must have been people who'd been in sort of New the people in Reds who sort of knew Jackson Pollock and that lot, because they were sort of hobnobbing in the same things. It seems like sort of artists,
yeah,
and all that sort of thing. And I really like that aspect of the sort of maybe beatnik parties, or perhaps a little bit early for beatnik, but they were sort of artists' parties in the 40s, with sort of hobnobbing and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that was really interesting.
You can really see the foundation for how that did translate into the beatniks, and then eventually the hippies of the 60s and counterculture. You can really see in this film how that was laying the foundations based off of, like what you said, this blurring with artists and political movements. I just think that they were less separated back then as they might be now. So you can see how he would mix into that, and how they were trying to use art as an engine to drive political movements that were counterculture, and that were against some of the more conservative aspects of like the 1950s, right? So we don't really have that as well. Maybe I shouldn't say we don't have that as much now. It's different now, but like this film is great because it's kind of this block that helps you see the larger picture.
Yeah.
A connective tissue.
The connective.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of focus too on the woman in his life as well, and the sort of impact that she had, because she was an artist in her own right, very talented person, but she kind of gave up a lot of that in order to support Jackson Pollock in his work, and to help to motivate him to really make the most of these opportunities that he had. And it's quite interesting to see that too, that his how he reacts to that, really, in a sense, to almost kind of push her away, doesn't he? He had quite a self-destructive kind of personality.
He is. That's his a major flaw. I mean, he's a nasty man, and I do appreciate that the film doesn't sort of hide that or browbeat that. Is that there was a lot of misogyny baked into everything that Jackson Pollock did, and he destroyed himself, but often blamed women for it. And at the end of the film, are we spoiling? Are we spoilers levels? I mean, you can Google how Jackson Pollock died, I guess, and it's not really a spoiler. So,
well,
but like
we kind of have always tried that. We had a policy of kind of saying we weren't going to spoil things, but we haven't been particularly great at not spoiling. Sometimes
does it count for like real people?
It's hard to not sometimes talk about some of the things if we're going to have a discussion about film. So it's a bit difficult. And I guess in this case, because he's an historical figure, and there's a very high chance that most people might go into this film already having an idea about the outcomes, that it's not as much of a spoiler as it might be, for some other situations. So I think we're okay if you want to talk a bit about that.
Just connecting to his misogyny is his demise, where he famously died in a car accident where he was driving drunk with a girlfriend. He had split from Marcia Gay Harden, and then he had a new girlfriend played by Jennifer Connelly. And then she brought a friend, and the three of them were driving, and he was drunk, and he crashed the car. And him and the friend died. Not Jennifer Connelly; she survived. So, this long track of misogyny throughout his entire life and career is a part of how he died.
Yeah, he's definitely not sugar-coated, is he?
No, not at all.
Unpleasant.
It's difficult sometimes because he's just so awful. And I think that Marcia Gay Harden is sort of the part of this film that you can connect with in order to carry it through, because Ed Harris knows that this man is all these things we said: self-destructive, misogynistic. He's just terrible. So she's the sort of the beating heart that you can latch onto.
Yeah.
But I still don't think that makes this film easy to watch.
It's not easy to watch. It's very much not. And I guess one thing you not sort of say in his sort of defense, but the characters, but it's something that sort of maybe makes it slightly easier to take is the fact that a lot of his sort of bad behavior, unpleasantness, is related to his sort of basically his alcohol problem.
Right.
And so when he does sort of, clean up, which happens for one period, then he's sort of almost bearable.
Mm-hmm.
and then when he goes back to drinking, it's like, it's this sort of this horrible character is sort of released again.
Yeah. And back then they wouldn't have known so much. Like there might have been other sort of neurodiversity issues that were going on as well. That maybe back then they didn't really have a lot of knowledge about those sorts of things. So there might have been other explanations for some of his behavior, and then the alcoholism would have exacerbated those things as well. But yeah, it's quite sad that he did go through that period of where he seemed to be happy and calm and very productive, and he was living in this more isolated, smaller community, and he sort of seemed a bit settled, and he even at one point said he wanted to start a family, but then ultimately he just couldn't cope, and he sort of eventually succumbed back into the alcoholism and the sort of self-destructive behavior. Mm-hmm. And so that is quite it's a sad trajectory that you see through the film. And you mentioned about the end and the kind of the tragedy at the end, because like I said, when I went into the film, I didn't really know a lot about him.
I didn't know how he died either.
So I didn't know that. So when that happened at the end, even though you could kind of see it coming, in that moment, you could kind of see where it was going, but I didn't actually know that that's what happened to him. So it came as it was much more dramatic. It had more impact for me personally because I didn't go into it knowing that. So sorry, folks, if we've spoiled that for
I mean, as soon as we finished watching it, we Wikipedia'd and then be like, is this really how Justin Pollock died? And I'm like,
when I watch films about real life people, I always end up going straight to Wikipedia after and reading about the actual sort of real story behind it.
Yeah. But and one of the quotes, I think, from Lee Krasner, his wife, Master Gay Harden's character, that she says, everyone drinks, but he's a great painter. And I guess this is also part of it, is that the sort of back then it was much more sort of acceptable to sort of be a heavy drinker, and there wasn't. It was slightly pre-AA or the very, very early days of AA. It wasn't really widespread. There was sort of, I don't think there was such a thing as rehab really. Sort of asylums, with sort of scary treatments, and so people just even in this, that's sort of you see in the 60s, like all these people with massive sort of drug and alcohol problems, and nobody batted an eyelid because they thought it was just either cool or they just didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And so,
or things become more socially acceptable depending on who you are, because that's obviously like a whole part in society. Like people who are very successful at something, or are very well known or famous or very wealthy. They seem to have there's a certain different level of acceptance of their behavior, and that seems to be changing a little bit over the last few years with sort of things like Me Too and things like that, where we see a bit of a sea change in that now, where people are starting to call that out more about, well, certain behaviors aren't acceptable. But obviously back then it was more because he was a famous artist and he was making a lot of money and selling a lot of pictures.
And he was a man.
Maybe would be more prone to look the other way and excuse things that, the guy who worked down at the local insurance office might not be able to get away with behaving like that,
I mean, he was very privileged, right? He comes from, what you just mentioned. He was very successful, which allows him to insulate himself from the changes that were happening that had happened in society. And, as you said, John, during this time, we hadn't really, like, the discourse about, mental health and its connection to substance abuse. Like you mentioned, AA, there, like, all of this stuff hadn't been there yet. So there's a certain level of, this is just how always men have been dealing with their inner demons. And like you said, excusing things because he was a genius, and thinking that you can, separate those two together and not understand how they are interconnected. And, like, as a white man, he could get away with a lot that was just sort of also baked into that culture as well, where we talked about Misha Gay Harden's character having to take a step down from her career, from her aspirations, and that was just expected of what women had to do, what women were supposed to do. And then, because it was just sort of all about lifting up your husband at the cost of your own ambitions.
Yeah, I slightly feel that it's partly the sort of romantic of the myth of the sort of romantic, the romantics. I mean, they've been sort of associated with drugs and alcohol since the sort of late 18th, early 19th century, and it's sort of part of that as well. If you're an artist, you're sort of going to be hard drinking, and so that allows people to sort of tolerate it a bit more than you don't get that with the sort of necessarily hard drinking accountant,
right? And
whatever it is.
That's one thing that I kind of wish that this film more interrogated. If it's okay for me to be a little bit critical about it for a bit, is that I do feel that it. I don't feel that Ed Harris is trying to do anything to separate or criticize that sort of legend that you just said, that, like, every artist has a bit of madness and there's something that something self-destructive about them that has to be in order for them to actually be a genius. I kind of feel that one of my issues with the film is that he just sort of carries that along. Like, that's the story he wants to tell and he tells it, and he's not really, like, taking a step back to see to criticize that narrative.
That is true, I guess, because it's 24 years old now. But I also did sort of feel like he's a nasty person, and
I know that's the problem too, is that he's nasty.
So he's not. I mean, there's a few bits where he's, at least the best that could be said for him occasionally is sort of moderately charming, or sort of I guess just not unpleasant, but he's not nice. But he's just sort of neutral. That's about as far as he gets. And
so, when he made a conscious decision to be, as you say, charming, he obviously could do that.
Yeah.
But he obviously struggled to cope with maintaining that. And it was far easier for him to lose that control and just lash out quite easily, it seemed. I mean, that's how he came across in the film anyway. Because we were talking about the film and the character as it is in the film rather than the actual person. But we I guess that is a good opportunity to segue a little bit into Ed Harris, the director, because obviously I don't think anyone would quibble with his credentials as an actor. He's obviously, he's a very, very talented actor, and he's been in lots of really great films over the years. And I don't think anyone would say anything about that, negative about that. But in terms of, this was obviously his first feature film. How did you, Brad? How did you feel about his choices, sort of stylistically, and in terms of other aspects of the filmmaking? side of it. How do you think the film does in that respect?
I think it's a very like solid as far as like directing choices and editing choices. Like it's a very, very solid directed film. It is a film that feels like when actors become directors, their focus, not all cases, this is not making a blanket statement. I mean, there are exceptions, but it tends to be that like they want to showcase acting. So some of the more artistically ambitious shots, some of the more experimental elements of filmmaking tend to not tend to get pushed aside because when actors direct, they kind of want to create an atmosphere to showcase performances, and he does a great job here. Everyone is really doing great work, but I think that because of that, there are some elements of Jackson Pollock's art, the art itself, that I think kind of gets a little bit pushed aside because he's more interested in telling the story of depression, substance abuse, misogyny, just what happens with this nasty man, rather than actually why is his art such a breakthrough? What does it actually mean to art history and his place in it? There are just certain things that I know about Jackson Pollock's art that I wish he had cinematically taught us.
Yeah, that's very true. Because there's a little bit of sort of, he's Peggy Guggenheim thinks he's great. He's selling pictures for a lot of money. But yeah, as you say, I mean, I not knowing anything about the art really, apart from it's sort of the drip
Right.
smell. I was sort of like, how is what is it? What is it that makes it so revolutionary? That's a good point.
It's always a thing with biography films anyway, isn't it? Like very often it's kind of like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens,
Right.
and it's kind of focusing on the personality and the historical sort of hitting those points where significant things happened. And that's actually something interesting that we can tie into talking about the second film in a little bit as well, because it takes a completely different approach to the biography of a historical figure.
And if anything, it makes that front and center of it, whereas I don't think that Pollock, that was the mission in Ed Harris's mind. There's a scene that me and Fred talked about this, where like he's got the painting, he's got the canvas on the ground, on the floor in his like shack thing, and he's painting, and then he drops some on the floor, and he's like cocks his head and looks at it funny, and it's like oh, and then he starts splattering, and I just kind of felt like that's the revelation that I mean, if that is how Jackson Pollock came to that revelation, that's fine. But you have to sell as to why that is the breakthrough. Like there are aspects of this that Jackson Pollock was dedicated to nature, and he was moving away from symbols and images in his artwork to better reflect nature. So he was looking at dirt, sand, leaves, human skin, the cosmos, like all of these things, that the nature's actual patterns. And by having splatter, nature is sort of dictating the shape of that splatter. You're giving it a hand, obviously, with your velocity and where you throw your arm and throw your paint. But that end splat is dictated by nature, laws of gravity, laws of motion, all these things, right? And so that's what he was really moving towards. And there's not really anything that I saw in this film that really brought that idea across.
That's interesting.
And I kind of wish that it did.
So was you as you know a little bit about the artist, was some jazz one of his influences, with the sort of improvisational quality of that music?
It could be. I don't know enough about his relationship with jazz, but that could very well be.
it is in terms of the timing. I think you're quite
Yeah.
right in that kind of that whole scene, like you were saying, Jonathan, at the beginning, of that kind of emergence of the beat culture and
Yeah.
things like that. That very much kind of that, the kind of the music and thing would go hand in hand with that, I think, as well. And you're right, Brad, that the film, it does portray his discovery as kind of just this accident, isn't it? That he
Yeah,
just sort
this
of spilled
accident.
some pain and then kind of went, hey, I kind of like that. Let's
But
carry on doing
it
that a
doesn't
bit
make
more.
any, yeah, exactly. And it doesn't make any attempt to sort of sell how significant that
Yeah.
breakthrough was, even if it was just a random accident that led him there.
Well, exactly. Because when you look at some of his pictures, they very much have this kind of like kind of mad sort of quality of
Yeah.
chaos and emotion and sort of they're very powerful, and you can tell that there is um, some thought process that's gone into that. And I think there's even a scene in the film where they show him giving an interview to somebody, and he kind of he stresses that this isn't about accidents. It's that I do it in a controlled way, and that I'm expressing something in it. So, but you're right that the film doesn't really convey that. It really, even when it shows him doing the art, he does just look like he's just kind of going, I think I'll just
Yeah.
splash a little bit over here, and it doesn't really convey that sense of control and expression that you might that you would assume would be part of that process, I think.
Yes.
So
One thing
The mythology behind the philosophy behind it.
yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I think the film does struggle a bit to convey that, and even just his, because it relies so much on the focuses on his personality
Mhm.
and those sort of hitting those historical points in his life story, that
Yeah.
it doesn't really convey the impact that his work had and why people were so moved by it, and why he had that he developed the kind of reputation that he did, and
And
because he was a real radical in many ways, wasn't he? And I think the film doesn't necessarily always convey that to the
mhm.
audience, or at least not to me anyway.
one of the
And you
reasons.
can.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, part of that might be the source, because it's based on this sort of, or informed by this book, Jackson Pollock, An American Saga, which came out in 1989 and actually won the Pulitzer Prize for biography in 91. But it says on Wikipedia, it says the first book to explore the artist with psychological depth. Sorry, and it was, so there was like the author had like 850 people interviewed, like 2,000 interviews, and anyway, including unpublished documents, medical and psychiatric reports. So basically, the psychological side of it is the emphasis in the book, rather than all this sort of art or the or the sort of political side, I guess. But
Which is a shame because I think they're all connected. Like
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what I
That's
would
what I
make
was
that
going to say
argument
too.
for. Yeah.
That obviously the psychology of his character and how in his expression of that is part of what part of art, isn't it? Of
Mhm.
what
yeah,
artists do. So they are very much connected.
the
Yeah.
book, should you want to read it, is a real doorstopper. It's more than 900 pages long.
Oh my.
Wow.
Oh my.
Right. Yeah, I might struggle to fit that in, I think, but I'm sure it'd be quite interesting, though. I mean, obviously, he's quite an interesting character, so I'm sure it would be an interesting read. But
Yes, yeah, I
But
think
I
it's
would
934 pages to be precise.
wait, that's a bit much for me.
unfortunately, Jonathan,
Especially
you probably
for
just
such
put
a
off like hundreds of people from reading that book. You might have otherwise gone to investigate it.
because he just doesn't sound like is he someone I want to hang around with for 900 pages? I'm like, yeah, I don't want like he's going to be my brain for 900 pages. That's a lot to ask.
Exactly.
But I would say like go to the MoMA and see and be surrounded by his images, because that's for me the best way to understand Jackson Pollock is to like see, just have this image that he created just take up your field of view and then just sort of let your mind drift. And I always say that it kind of feels like those magic eye paintings that we had that were a fad like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But like, I know that sort of is reduces it, but like, just let your mind drift, because what happens with his paintings is like things push and pull in your field of vision. So colors will come towards you, other colors will push away, and you kind of just feel yourself being sort of caught between. I mean, it feels like looking at the cosmos. You just feel like you're looking kind of at infinity as all of these colors play tricks on our eyes, right? Because that was a lot of what the abstract impressionists were doing with color, was how does color change your emotions? How does opposite types of color play with your field of vision and your depth perception and all of these kind of things? So that's my one takeaway that I would take from this film, which is there's a lot of good things about this film, but I hope that it encourages people to go and see Jackson Pollock and just let themselves just get lost in it.
That's a great sort of summary, I think. Or great conclusion.
I think so. Yeah. So would you, just in a very quick summary, so like I would recommend the film. I think it's a good quality piece. And I think overall it's interesting and compelling, and it's definitely worth a watch. What would your last thoughts be about Pollock, Brad?
I think that it's a very solid, well acted film, and the way it tells the story is very solid. I feel that if you want to know why Jackson Pollock was so important to art and art history, it's lacking.
Yeah. No. How about you, Jono?
Well, yes, I think I still really enjoyed it. I appreciated it. I think, it's a really good film. I guess the surprise when I watched it again, rewatched it, was just how serious his sort of mental health issues were. Mm-hmm. And I thought, gosh, it's actually quite a troubling film, really. So.
It's interesting because you said it's like 25 years old now, right? So we have come 25 years since the movie was made with our knowledge about mental health and just sort of general public awareness of it. Yeah. So it's interesting to even see it as a study of mental health from 25 years ago with a man who was struggling for mental health way back in like the 1950s.
Yeah.
Okay, so folks, definitely go and seek it out. I know there is a Blu-ray. I don't have one, but I just rented it on Apple TV when I watched it. How about you, gents? Brad, you're in Canada, so for our North American listeners, could you let them, maybe point them in the right direction to find the film if they want to see it?
Yeah, we rented it off of is it Apple TV, iTunes, the Apple Store. So it was just like $6.99, whatever the standard. I think it's $4.99, right? Because it's an old release. So yeah, I think that's what it was.
Yeah. Okay, presumably it's available on all the other streaming. If people don't use Apple TV,
Google Play, whatever the other ones are too.
Yeah, I'm sure it's pretty widely available. It seemed to me, I got the impression that it was fairly easy to access it. So, how about you, Jonathan? Were you the same as me? Did you just rent it?
I did. I rented it on Prime, but it's also on YouTube in the UK. And but two other points. I mentioned artists to one of my colleagues who's an artist, and she recommended two other films. But being a woman, she said Fur, which is about Diane Arbus, and Frida,
that one.
About Frida Kahlo.
I've seen that one,
But then when she said that, I thought, we've got quite two blokes, basically, as our artists.
That's true, we do, yeah.
So I thought we'd better mention those two. Look out those. Maybe we can do those another episode.
Yeah, I know. I've seen Frida, and it is definitely a good film. That's definitely worth checking out. And and maybe another time we'll try to get some more diversity in our coverage of artists as well. So maybe we could always do a follow-up show and cover some more films about.
Yeah, I'm down for a part 2. I love films about artists. So
yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. Well, what we're going to do now, folks, is we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to go to 15th century Russia, and have a little excursion through
Lots of fun.
some extraordinary times there, and an extraordinary personality there as well.
There'll be lots of dirt and mud.
Oh, yes. So we'll be back in just a second. Listeners, if you pay very close attention, you'll hear some very fascinating and interesting information that I'm sure you'll want to take to heart, which will tell you all about our social media platforms where you can find us and reach out to us, because we'd love to hear from you. If you want to just drop us a little note and let us know what you're thinking, we'd love to hear from you. So we'll be back in just a minute. We're going to take a break, and then we'll return to talk about Andrei Rublev.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the Podcast.
And we're back. Welcome back, listeners. Welcome back, Jonathan, and our special guest, Brad McDermott, who's speaking to us today from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. My old stomping ground. I used to live in Toronto for many years before I moved over to the UK, and so it's nice to hear about. Before we actually started the recording tonight, we were talking a little bit about Toronto and how much it's changed since I used to live there in the 1990s. So
I was never here in the 1990s either, so
okay.
It wasn't until the 2000s that I actually lived here. So I don't know exactly the Toronto that you know. It's in your memory.
Well, the Toronto that I know lives up here, and it may be gone. It may be gone. But,
there might be parts of it still. I'm sure
forgotten.
there's a few parts of it still.
I had some good times in Toronto, but I've had some good times all kinds of places as well. So you know, there you go. But anyway, it's nice. It's nice for you to be here tonight, Brad. And
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And so tonight, your swap, because we proposed the theme for you, and then we said we decided on Jackson Pollock for our film, but then you came back with a really great proposal. So do you want to tell us a bit about your choice tonight?
Yeah, sure. So when you send me the theme of artists and films about artistic inspiration, I just could not help but go towards this film, and it's Andrei Rublev by Andrei Tarkovsky, and this is a film that's up there on the mountain as one of the greatest films of all time, and I think it deserves to be there. It's high in the canon, but it is. I just love this film, and I've loved it since I saw it in college, when it kind of blew my mind as to, as it does for many people, as to what cinema can be. And I just had never been on a podcast where I could talk about this film and my love for it. So I thought if it's okay with you guys, we could talk about Andrei Rublev tonight.
100%.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of my favorite films. And actually, very often I have conversations with people because they know that I'm a film buff and I'm really into films. And they'll often ask me questions like, what do you think is the greatest film of all time, and things like that. And usually at a push, because I don't really like making those kind of proclamations about anything, because I love all kinds of things. And I think all kinds of things have different values in different ways, but this will be one of the films that I would cite to someone if they asked me, what do you think one of the best films ever made was? And this would be one of the ones that I would pick. Because like you, the first time I saw it, I was just so completely overwhelmed and blown away by it on so many levels. And it's such a profound film. It's deeply moving, incredible imagery, and it's just beautiful and deals with a lot of issues and just the human experience. And I think it's just a profoundly amazing film. And even, I've probably watched it maybe 10, 12 times now, and I still have those same feelings when I watch it. So it's definitely one that I'm really happy that you brought it to the table for us to talk about tonight, because it's a really great thing. Jonathan, how about you?
Well, I'm going to be the other side of the sort of equation here. This is the first time I've seen it.
Oh,
Oh, really?
wow.
Okay.
Amazing.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you didn't like it, and I was
No,
going
I wasn't going to say that. No, I mean,
Although that would have been interesting too.
that
That would
was
have been an interesting
proper
conversation.
rubbish. Yeah, no, definitely. I did really enjoyed it. I mean, it's Tarkovsky is one of the greats, basically.
Yeah.
The films of his I've seen are Stalker and Solaris. That's Stalker
Right.
probably most. And yeah, I know his sort of thing, that he's like a sort of genius par excellence of cinema, really. And this, I mean, I guess, is this his greatest? I guess this is a ridiculous discussion.
Well, that's the kind of thing when you talk
It's,
about
yeah.
greatest things, because he made 7 feature films
Yeah,
and one or two short films, and every single one of them is a total absolute masterpiece.
yeah,
So it's very
And
difficult.
so different.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's very difficult if someone says, what do you think the best Tarkovsky film is?
mm,
It's a really impossible question to answer, because I wouldn't be able to say hands down one's better than another one or anything,
Mhm.
because they're all, even that short film I really love of his, what's it called? The violin
Steamroller and the
and the
violin.
steamroller and the violin is
Yeah.
just such a beautiful and profoundly moving film
yeah,
that, like, you literally just can't fault him. He literally was just a genius.
yeah.
And uh, yeah, so you're absolutely right, Jonathan. There's no, it's in terms of the all-time kind of master filmmakers, he's right there in that list, for
Very
sure.
much, very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed completely.
And I mean, these film, this film is, well, it's not short either. None of it's short,
No,
apart from the steamer and the violin. None
Yeah.
of his films are short, really, are they?
No.
no, they're not. Tarkovsky is famous for, taking his time for long takes,
Yeah,
and for creating such immersion. That's one thing that I think of when I think of Tarkovsky. Just even the films you cited, like Solaris and especially Stalker, like just how much the images, the music, the sound. He just wanted to bring you into like an entirely different world and keep you there, even
yeah,
when he was not interested in pushing the plot forward or even clarity. These things were not as paramount for him,
yeah.
but you can just absolutely get wrapped into his films, and they're in the world of his films, and they're just always captivating.
Completely. Yeah, incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
Incredibly.
Yeah. Just one just stunning image after another. And
Yeah,
this film is shot in black and white, of course, and just every frame you could almost take out and, put it as a poster or a work of art on its own. Just absolutely stunning images throughout the
yeah,
film. We were talking when we discussed the Pollock's film, and about the fact that most biographical films tend to be in a more chronological way, just, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and tell the story in that way. But Tarkovsky approached this, which is essentially a biography of a very famous icon, religious icon painter from the 15th century. And obviously, in the West, most people, this is not a name that would trip off the tongue as someone even being as famous as Jackson Pollock in terms of being well known. But obviously, in Russian culture and in sort of Eastern Europe culture, he would be a much more profoundly famous figure historically. And he chose to tell the story rather than doing that chronological, timeline and hitting all the key points of the story. He just chose, what is it? There's 7 sections, isn't there? And
Yeah,
he
they're
just
kind of
basically, yeah, and he
chapters.
takes key moments of transition in his life, and he just has these particular focus on just one specific event or one moment or experience in his life that may in some way have impacted his artistic trajectory as well.
But most of his life is not, nobody really knows that much about who he actually was. So Tarkovsky uses a lot of, artistic liberty to create a narrative for him. So we have him, starting as a monk, with working on some icons which have gained some notoriety. So he is then, he has 2 people that are kind of like his traveling companions, Kirill and Daniel. And as word starts to spread that the young Andrei Rublev has some talent in iconography, in icon painting, they recruit an old master for him to tutor under, Theophanes the Greek. And for a time period, the 2 of them work together. Then we transition to, there's a whole subplot about the brother to the Tsar, who is, I think, trying to succeed the throne. And he kind of uses, the artists are hired to create works in these monasteries, but then he, hires Tartar bandits to raid these cities and destroy the monasteries. Mm-hmm. So it really does show all of these artists and peasants and as sort of just pawns of these cycles of tit for tats among the wealthy, the noble classes. And he has a lot of really internal struggles about depicting the Last Judgment, right? So in artistic history, the Last Judgment is always this thing that represents, the good people go to heaven. I mean, in Christianity, the good people go to heaven and the bad people go to hell. And one of the things I love about this film is just how conflicted he is with showing these imagery to the Russian people, because a lot of what this film is really great about is depicting just how bleak life was for Russia during this time. Yeah. And do you really want to show people, are you just creating a system that further oppresses people by telling them you have a terrible life and what's waiting for you is even more terrible, right? After your life's over. So all of these internal conflicts go through sort of the middle of the plot. There's a Tartar raid, as I mentioned, and he saves a girl's life. But then she sort of betrays his confidence by going off with a Tartar who sort of fancies her. All of these things are, tests to Andrei. Until the very final act of the film is with a boy who is being hired by, again, the prince's brother, I believe, to create a giant bell for a new church. And it depicts, this is an amazing sequence, absolutely one of the greatest things ever shot, as far as I'm concerned, is the creation of this bell, because it is just epic. And Andrei sort of circles this boy and watches him as he, corrals basically an army to make this bell. And that, I guess, did I miss anything out? There's a sequence of pagans as well. And that was another thing the film does great is contrasting Christianity and its supremacy with the old pagan traditions from before the Christian era. And again, part of his struggle with depicting the Last Judgment is, are you really condemning these people if their only fun they have in life is pleasures of the flesh? for midsummer festivals where they have basically an orgy. If that is their only pleasure in life, do we really want to show them imagery where they're going to hell? So all these things, there's even a sequence in the middle of this that depicts the crucifixion of Jesus, and it's very strange because it seems to be depicted in like Siberia. It's in the middle of snow, which is not where obviously Jesus was from and where he was crucified. So again, it's this sequence is like a Russian version of the story of the Passion, which is really fascinating to me.
But it's significant that this film demonstrates about religion and the place that religion has in society. And it was made at a time, obviously, when sort of atheism or kind of anti-religion was the orthodoxy in Russia or in the Soviet Union at the time that this film was made. So this film suffered some censorship issues and being repressed in the Soviet Union at the time due to that. But it does, as you say, make a lot of fascinating parallels between all of these issues within the film.
But it mirrors that sort of struggle, right? Because in communism, communism's part of its foundation was the absence of religion, very strictly. But yet, at the same time, Andrei Rublev, the Russian Orthodox Church, and icon imagery are so foundational to that culture. So you can feel this film sort of being pulled between, depending who had control of the time, as to whether the Russian people were going to be able to see it or not.
And you mentioned that sequence about the bell making at the end, which is quite extraordinary because the whole that whole sequence is quite, because you didn't mention about the fact that this boy, his father was a master bell maker who had passed away. And so this boy was kind of dragged, he kind of put himself forward and said, well, I can make this bell for you. But the whole sequence very much captures the kind of self-doubt, because you learn, talking about spoilers, but you learn that the boy doesn't really know what he's doing, but he sort of manages to corral and lead this whole army of people in this big, huge community event of creating this magnificent, work of art, really, this giant sort of bell. But he actually, for him, it's all bluff and bluster, isn't it? So that's what kind of makes that whole sequence so profound and so moving, is the fact that he's in a certain sense, he's an imposter, isn't he? But it all comes off in this extraordinary way, and it is just such an amazing sequence, and it's so powerful in many ways that I love that section of the film so much.
I wanted, on my sort of DVD of this, I wanted a sort of an extra, which was making of that bell sequence, to sort of learn a bit more about it, because it is so extraordinary. It has an enormous number of extras. And the whole thing is so spectacular. I'd like to know sort of how more about it, how long it took, how many extras there really were. Did they really make a bell? I mean, it looks like it. And beautiful scene, and immense sort of drama. I guess it's slightly a metaphor for sort of faith, having faith in your art. Faith,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, this is the miracle from God, right? That the film closes on. And I mean, I'm not saying I'm not religious, but I'm saying in the film's perspective, in Andrei's perspective, all the Andrei's perspective, even that are connected to this film, this is the miracle. Like, for all of this film, Andrei Rublev is not actually making art. We don't really actually see him do anything. He's repairing. There's one image where he's sort of repairing an icon that was burned, that he did not create himself. He's just repairing it. But you don't really see him actually make any art. Through this whole film, he's kind of has an artist's block. Like, he just, is not able to move forward. He doesn't want to do the Last Judgment. All he sees is bleakness, and he doesn't know what does he want to put out into the world, and he doesn't want to put out anything into the world that will add to that bleakness. So this final miracle, this boy who is the son of a bell maker, but whose knowledge of bell making his dead parents did not pass on to him. And like you said, David, he is lying. He is improvising. He is bluffing. He is making it up as he goes along. And the fact at the very end of this movie, we don't know that until the very end of this movie, when he has a psychological breakdown from the sheer exhaustion of trying to keep that bluff up for as long as he did. He'd be killed if the bell didn't ring, right? All of this stuff. That's the miracle that finally makes Andrei want to paint again.
Yeah.
And just to jump off your point, John, one of the great things about this sequence too is just also how we learn how to make a bell, and like that's it's so educational as well as like spiritual. Like the entire process that this kid is going through, even though he's bluffing the entire time, but the type of clay that you need, how many people it takes to like dig a great big hole, where you're going to get all this metal from, all of that stuff, like the forge that they build, and when you like how the forge all funnel into the one pit in the ground after it's all covered up. All of this stuff is so educational that it's thrilling to watch, because you're right there in the middle, and now after seeing this movie how to make a giant bell in the Middle Ages.
Yeah,
it is extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny that the film finishes with this, which is sort of earthy, and it's right under the ground, some of it, or sort of like in a pit. But it starts off with another extraordinary, I mean, it's full of extraordinary sequences, but this other sequence with a hot air balloon, which is sort of like stitched together with animal skins, basically, I think. And this character sort of just floats. I mean, it doesn't have anything particularly to do with the plot as far as I could figure out. It's just a beautiful scene. This character is just sort of floating around, people looking at them, and they're sort of there he is up in the sky. So it starts in the sky and finishes sort of in the ground or under the ground.
But it is still that leap of faith, isn't it? Which I think kind of does tie it together with that ending, because it's about someone who obviously has maybe discovered something, or he's trying to advance or progress science or learning, or he's trying to experiment, and obviously he's attacked in the film, isn't he? Like he soars above in this really beautiful sequence, but ultimately he comes crashing back down again, and is then set upon by the sort of ignorant thugs of the town who were treating him like he's some sort of a devil or something, because he's trying to do something that isn't sort of natural to them or something. So that sequence kind of ties back in nicely. And I like it because it ties in with Jackson Pollock as well, is because that all artists, don't they? I'm sure, Brad, you can recognize this, and anyone who does any kind of creative endeavor, you're kind of putting yourself out there, and you're kind of expressing yourself and your ideas and the things that you find interesting, or things that you want to convey to the world. But when you put it out there, you don't know how anyone's going to respond to it, or how anyone, and for every Jackson Pollock in the world, there's 500 other artists who never got that patronage, and never got that sort of step up, and were able to, and then you could say the same for actors or film directors or writers or anything. It's just always, you put yourself out there, and you don't know if people are going to accept you, or if they're going to, how your thing's going to come across. Are you going to soar up in the air, or are you going to come crashing down? Is the bell going to work, or is it not going to work? Or are you going to end up getting hung and drawn and quartered or something because the bell doesn't work? So it's always that it's such a sort of profound sort of statement on life, and on artists and stuff as well, isn't it?
I mean, that's the the internal struggle through this film. Like there's a whole sequence where where like there's another group of artists and they make something and then the prince's brother doesn't like it and then has them all blinded. Like if you're an artist in this time period, you're trying to express something. This is your period in life when you're alive. This is the conditions of your world, and that drive to express what you want to express is universal. It's everywhere, right? Every single culture on earth has art, and it always has. And so, but it comes at great cost in this environment, in this world, in this time period of time. So it takes a little bit of, like you said, just that leap of faith. This, I might be blinded, I might be drawn and quartered, I might, just amount to, I might just be ignored, all of that stuff. But you just have to jump. It takes, a little bit of madness, I think, to just take that leap of faith and do it.
Because you're right, you might be embraced and loved, or you might get your eyes plucked out. It is like you just don't know, and it just shows too how much artists and creative people, or even just anyone who's progressive or radical, or who wants to change something, or comes up with a new idea that sort of not conforms with the kind of the orthodoxy of the time, or the political orthodoxy or anything, then there's a danger to it as well, isn't there? It's like you really are putting yourself, sometimes literally your life, on the line in terms of expressing yourself, because it just depends on the atmosphere and the people around you about how that's going to be perceived.
And Andrei wanted to, according to this film, reflect the times that he was living in. He wanted to make art that would inspire people to be more pious, but he didn't want to create art that would just make people feel worse about themselves, right? We're already living in terrible times. But you have systems in place, powers that be. We see the king and we see his brother that are thriving because of how, the terrible world that they keep, right? Like they are the ones who are all in charge. They are the ones who keep the people oppressed, who keep this state of just constant misery. So they're profiting off of that. And do they want these artists to inspire, people to rise up against them? No, they don't. So this is part of what they want is to keep this oppression. But as an artist, you want to, you want people to enjoy what you're creating. You don't want people to feel terrible.
It's a very brutal world that he portrays. On the one side, basically most people are peasants, and on one side there's the Tsar and his brother, and the boyars, who are sort of like the lords, and then on the other side are the Tartars, who are sort of Genghis Khan, basically.
Right.
Not actually Genghis Khan, but his sort of
the Mongols,
Mongols, essentially.
Yeah.
And so they're just sort of riding in off the steppe, sort of killing people and randomly visiting immense violence on them.
And it's a conspiracy. The Tsar's brother hires the Tartar Mongols and go sack this city and destroy this monastery that my brother funded. It's just these little tit for tats, but you're just a pawn in this larger game. You have no control, and if you just live in that city, well, tough, you're dead.
But one interesting thing that I saw and is that it's an interesting approach to his life, because as you say, he doesn't know, they don't know much about his life or really what happened, and a lot of it is he's sort of almost sidelines of it. And so with Pollock, it's all about him, whereas this one, much of it's all about other people. He's sort of there witnessing it.
He's an observer.
He's an observer. And this,
Which I guess is what artists are as well, aren't they? They're the observers of society, and they reflect it back in the work that they do, right? So I guess that's kind of the idea there.
yeah, and
But
for me, it's like a sort of because one thing we should mention that Andrei Tarkovsky, rather than Andrei Rublev, he was also a sort of very sort of spiritual guy, very devout chap. Although I guess he was an Orthodox Christian, but I guess he wasn't an Orthodox Christian, if you know what I mean.
yeah, he did seem like, maybe secular is a strong word, but he did seem, as far as I know, like he was Christian, but he did seem to be less into, dogma, and was way more interested in spirituality. I know that was something that Tarkovsky was very concerned with, was that our love of like science to not dictate, but to, we put science up on this pedestal. That's sort of what we've been doing in the 20th and 21st centuries.
Yeah.
Is, putting science up on this pedestal, lowering the importance of religion. And there are reasons, very good reasons for that. But one of the things that science is sort of not doing is filling that spiritual void. That is part of human nature and has been since the very beginning. So that was one thing that Tarkovsky was very concerned about, and so he was making films to reflect something to reflect the spirit of human nature.
Yeah, I feel like this witnessing is part of it, because it's sort of it's decentering humanity in a way. It's sort of because humans are just being sort of trampled on, in a sense, and just watching it all go past, and that's a sort of somewhat of a sort of. It was a bit like that film, the film we last watched, Crimson Gold, which is sort of I said was an ego-free movie, because there's this also the protagonist in that is sort of watching all these things happen, and he's not really the sort of. He's there, but he's not really the heroic guy doing heroic things. He's sort of watching it all sort of wash over him in a way, or wash past, watching the river flow. And that seemed to be part of Andrei Tarkovsky's sort of vision. I reckon.
And I think that's one of the great. There's a good contrast point between Pollock and Andrei Rublev, because I had mentioned. My issues with Pollock is that I don't feel like I know his artistic importance. And again, very different style, right? Pollock is very different than Andrei Rublev. But what the movie Andrei Rublev does really well is that the artistic importance of what Andrei is doing is reflected constantly in the world, because Tarkovsky, like you said, is way more interested in depicting the world and its many, many complex struggles that Andrei lived in. We understand his internal desire or not desire to create art, but therefore we understand his place also in art history to try and depict something to make people closer to God, right? And it's a shift in focus where I feel Ed Harris is more interested in the man of Jackson Pollock, but not really doesn't really reflect the art of Jackson Pollock. Whereas this, even though we don't see Andrei create a single piece of art in this movie until there's a montage of his works at the very end, but we don't see him create anything. We understand the world around him that would drive him to want to make something.
I really like that final sequence, the montage of the works. I remember, actually, I have seen this film, come to think of it, about 35 years ago or something, when I was about 18. And because I do remember that final sequence.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, when I watched it in about 1990 or something, thinking, wow, icons, because, icons aren't such a big part of sort of Western life, really. I remember thinking they're obviously very profound, but they're quite abstract. Or the way he focuses closely in on the painting. He turns them from sort of not recognizable images into sort of abstract paintings, and you can think, oh yeah, perhaps that's where Kandinsky got his sort of abstract bits. It's almost like he's sort of focusing in on a little part of a icon, and yeah, fascinating there.
I think that I mean, I agree. I love that he does that, where we're zoomed in on the strokes of paint to the point of abstraction, because every single piece of painting of artwork is abstract if you go close enough, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually it pulls out that you can see its forms. And I think that that's also kind of keeping with this, how modern this film feels. Like, he was not interested, Tarkovsky, I mean, was not interested in making this feel like a costume historical epic, right? Like making, I can't remember the time period between this and something like War and Peace, right? The great big 7-hour epic. I can't remember the guy's name.
Bondarchuk. Sergei
Yes.
Bondarchuk.
Yeah. Right. Like, I love that film, and no shots fired against that film, but it is a big costume epic drama, and it has, experimental stuff in it too. Absolutely. But Tarkovsky was not interested in that level of high costume artifice. He wanted to make this film feel modern, contemporary, even if it was depicted in the past. And I just think like choices like that, as you mentioned, are part of that idea where, abstract art is a contemporary, at least kind of more contemporary idea in how well known it is in our general culture in the West. And so to start that sequence in abstraction and then gradually pull away to recognizable images of Christ, of angels, that kind of thing, is part of that contemporary idea.
And maybe that's the way the whole film is. It's sort of close-ups, abstract close-ups, these little sequences of, I don't know, with the jester in the barn. And it's only at the end, when you sort of look back at it, it makes a sort of a painting or a sort of cohesive whole. And we realize that it's not just there's something sort of larger about it.
There's something earthy.
A culmination of all the things that we've seen up till then, all these little sort of these moments. And then at the end, we get this huge burst of color, because that sequence is in color.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like that culmination where you actually see the work that he did and the expression. And
with the big chorus singing on the score. Yeah.
And then what do you make of the very end? Because the last shot, it ends on a shot of nature, of horses.
Yeah.
And so what do you make of that?
Tarkovsky loves horses. I don't know, like the idea of horses is throughout his filmography. And I don't know, it could just be, an eccentricity of his. Horses can symbolize something for Tarkovsky that maybe we don't have access to through his films. It's just a personal symbol for him. I think of maybe Ozu and the Red Teapot, that kind of idea. Just these symbols that mean something only to the author of the film, to the director of the film.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Jonathan?
Beautiful again. I mean, I always like thunder and rain. There's something about it. Horses, I guess. I have a friend whose mum was a great lover of horses, not actually the animals, but just horse pictures and horse sort of. So the house was full of, or their apartment was full of horse things, basically. And I think they had this sort of symbolic quality. Like, I'm not sure what it was exactly, but it was maybe freedom and strength and, sort of wildness. And there's something about them.
The sequence that returns us back to nature, which is, I think, the main, again, connecting to some things I said about Jackson Pollock, like, Tarkovsky is more interested in like woods, dirt, mud, water. At the very end of this film is ash from a fire, and then again the horses in the rain. Like, he is much more interested in that visually as an image rather than more man-made constructed things like icons. which we see here and there throughout this film, but definitely not as much as we see the Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even the opening sequence kind of focuses a bit on horses, doesn't it? It ends on a horse, and
when he crashes the balloon, we immediately cut to a horse somersaulting or rolling in the field. Yeah. And it's there's no sound. It's sort of like this pause after this crash, and then we start with the actual story of Andrei himself, with Danielle and Kirill on a pilgrimage.
Yeah, because that first bit with the balloon, he's not in it, is he? He's sort of
no, and it doesn't seem connected to the main sort of story at all. It's just sort of this prologue that kind of sets the kind of the tone, if you will.
Yeah.
On one of the special features, one of the scholars talks about how it's kind of a bit of a folk tale about a Russian peasant who blew up a great big balloon and flew, and this sort of myth of the first man who flew, even though it's not really true, obviously. But that's something that Tarkovsky wanted to carry into this film, to open it with. And again, just kind of like the horses, it's sort of up to your interpretation, but I like, David, when you said like it's the leap of faith, and that returns again to the end, right? The sort of leap of faith that the bellboy the bellcaster has to do to create a giant bell out of no knowledge.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's incredible. The one, the pagan scene was sort of leapt out because it's sort of just so different from the rest of it. Because the rest of it, I mean, there's a lot of mud and rain and sort of medieval style thing, and then it seemed quite sort of 60s. I almost felt like this is a bit, sort of slightly hippie-ish in a way.
Yes.
Which I guess you don't really associate with Tarkovsky, because he was ploughing his own furrow completely, But it's really beautiful in that sort of night, in the sort of mist or the dusk. What is it? So that sort of very northern light where it's not really, the sun doesn't quite set, and with torches and it's another extraordinary scene. Yeah, it's an incredible film, absolutely amazing, and I really got to watch the ones I haven't seen of his films.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because I've got the Criterion edition, which I'm sure, Brad, you've probably got in your collection as well. But it's actually not available from Criterion in the UK because of some of those horse sequences.
Yeah,
because
there are a
there's
few
some
scenes
laws
of
in the
animal
UK
cruelty.
about animal cruelty being depicted in films. British Board of Film Censors.
Classification. Film classification.
So they ordered some cuts, and so of course Criterion they don't go for that unless it's the Coen Brothers, of course, and Miller's Crossing. Then they think it's okay to cut 2 minutes out, but that's another story. But they basically they chose not to release it in the UK as opposed to cutting it. So the Blu-ray isn't available in the UK, but I think there is one available from Artificial Eye, if I'm not mistaken. But I don't know if it's been edited.
I have one which I've actually got the DVD when I had my film blog, and I was sent it as a screen. Well, I was sent this sort of box set as a screener, but it was like sort of within little plastic sort of sleek sort of covers. So, but it does have that sequence, the horse going down the steps and sort of falling off the steps. So there was at least, it does seem to have been released.
We should have a warning for people who have not seen this movie. There are some scenes of animal cruelty. So I strongly recommend this film, but if you are sensitive to that, just be aware before you watch it.
Yeah, it's quite... I was thinking, golly, how did they do that with CGI, and of course they didn't do it with CGI or whatever it is.
No, there's none of that.
No.
Unfortunately, back then. But yeah, there are some quite. I mean, even just aside from animal cruelty, there's a lot of quite harrowing, sort of violent imagery in the certain sense. Certainly, when the Tartars come and invade the town and stuff, it's quite a quite brutal sort of moments in it as well when they're sort of sacking the town.
Yeah.
But overall, definitely. So I guess it's fair to say we would all recommend the film to anyone who's never seen it before. Is that fair to say? Is there any? Do you just want to sum up any last kind of thoughts, Brad, that you have?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the greatest films ever made, and strong candidate for the greatest film ever made. I feel that this film reflects the struggle to make art, the soul of the artist, more than any others that I have seen so far.
Because it is true. I don't think you need to be an artist or anything to appreciate it on that level, because it's very much Andrei Rublev, and all the other characters are very much human, and you can relate to them on many different levels. So although it is very much a profound statement on creativity and artists, you don't have to necessarily approach it from that angle, because it has a lot of universality. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong, but universality in terms of its overall context and its some of the scenarios and things that it portrays.
I think so. Like I agree completely. Just because I as an artist, whoever you are, whatever time period you live in, wherever you come from, it's like there's an environment that surrounds you, and you have this desire to say something about that environment, to shape it, to change it, to leave a lasting impression, to expand people's minds. And this is the film for me that shows that struggle. There's so many reasons for Andrei not to make art. Like, the film is just heavy with all of these reasons, and yet he does at its end.
Yeah,
that's perfect summing up, really. Jonathan, was there anything else that you wanted to?
No, it's amazing looking, and it's a film that definitely bears with sort of rewatching, because first of all, I mean, you may come at the end of it and sort of think, perhaps didn't quite understand it. There's more to get out of it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it again.
Definitely. This is a film I revisit every couple of years for sure. And it was nice to have a good excuse to do it now, because we were going to have this conversation and stuff. But it's one that I think it's kind of an essential experience. Yeah. And I actually really envy anyone who's out there who's never seen it and is seeing it for the first time. I envy you, actually, because I think that first experience, above all others, is quite, incredibly profound and moving.
And I saw it in like a VHS copy, like way back in the day, with like burnt-in subtitles and non-anamorphic. Like it, I'm sure if I went back in time to see it when I first watched it, it looked like crap, but it still was amazing. Like it still has such a power.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, ideally, if you can see it in a cinema on a big screen, in that would be the ideal way to experiencing it. But any way you see it, you're right. It kind of, because it kind of transcends all that, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely seek it out, folks, if you've never seen it, and even if you have seen it, go and watch it again, because it's brilliant. And it is. Jonathan's absolutely right. It's the kind of film you get something out of it every single time you watch it. You'll pick different things out of it. Different moments will have a different impact on you. It is just a really profoundly great work of art. It really is. Yeah. And I think it's definitely everyone should see it at least once in their life. Definitely.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Right. So on that note, is there anything else that you guys wanted to say about it?
No disagreement.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brad, you said you have the Criterion, the current Blu-ray edition
Yes.
that's available, which also includes that short film, The Steamroller and the Violin, as an extra. So
Yes.
that in and of itself would be worth getting a copy of that. But
It
you
also
get
has the
both.
two cuts of it as well, too.
Yeah,
The
that's right. There's
shorter
two
cut and
versions of the
then,
film. We should
yeah.
explain that briefly. That
Yeah.
Tarkovsky did an original version of the film that was called The Passion of, what was it called? The Passion
Pas-
of
the
Andrei
Gospel
Rublev.
According to Andrei, or the Passion of
Yeah,
Andrei. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it's it's about 20 minutes longer, but
Mhm.
then he prepared a shorter version after being directed by Mosfilm or whoever it was. They kind of said you need to cut this down a bit or cut some bits out. So he prepared a shorter version, or he actually prepare? I'm trying to remember, but he was involved in the second edit, but
He did
he was
say
obviously,
that some of the cuts that he actually wanted to make, it's kind of a little bit gray because some of, like, yes, the longer cut has more stuff in it,
yeah,
20 minutes more stuff, but then he did say that some of the cuts that they made for the shorter version he did really want to make, so he
yeah.
agreed with. So it's
Yeah.
kind of a little bit gray. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the prevailing wisdom now, is that he had stated that the shorter version that is known as Andrei Rublev is his preferred version of the film. That he kind of thought that some of the cuts and the changes actually improved it. Um, I must admit, this time when I sat down to watch it, I did watch the longer version because I hadn't watched that for a while. So I decided I was going to watch that one this time. But his apparently, allegedly, his preferred cut is the shorter version
Yeah.
that runs about 3 hours. So, but folks, don't let that put you off, because I know sometimes when you hear a film is long, it kind of makes you go, oh, But actually, this film you won't notice.
I know everybody can just like binge through 3 episodes of Bridgerton. I don't know why.
I know. That's always annoys me when people say about long films they don't want to watch it. And I think, yeah, you'll sit and watch 5 episodes of Breaking Bad in a row
Yes.
and stay up till 1 in the morning. But all of a sudden, if a film's 2.5 hours, it's too long and you
It's
can't
long.
take it. And it's kind of like, well, it doesn't really ring true, does it? But definitely Andrei Rublev, after 15 minutes, you won't be thinking about how long it is. You'll just be totally sucked up and engrossed in it, and you won't be thinking, and you won't be looking at your watch. Let's put it that way. So definitely go and check it out, whichever version you decide to watch. Jonathan, how did you? So you said you had a DVD from,
Yeah, the Artificial Eye one.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
and I think there is a Blu-ray edition of
it is
that that's available as well.
available.
And they have a lovely little box set actually that has all of Tarkovsky's films in it.
Yeah.
It's called Sculpting in Time. And usually, if you kind of look around, you can get it at a pretty decent kind of budget price as well. So for someone who wants to dive into Tarkovsky, I would definitely recommend that. I think maybe there's been some criticism of some of the transfers of a couple of the films compared to the Criterion one, but it's actually, they're pretty good. It is a nice, inexpensive way to get all 7 of his films and have a chance to sit down and watch
Yeah.
them at home in decent quality. So I would definitely recommend people in the UK and Europe seek that out if you're interested.
Yeah, that's the one I have. I have the DVD version of the Sculpting Time blue sort of set, and it also has one disc is a documentary about him, a sort of interview.
Yeah. There's some excellent contextual stuff in it, and it's actually different than the Criterion stuff. So they actually, but there is sort of value in having them both, even though that might sound like a bit of an extravagance. There's actually a lot of good sort of contextual material that's different in each of the editions. So they are worth sort of seeking out independently.
Yeah.
And
Over
and I
here,
think, sorry, go ahead, Brett.
I was just saying, over here, in Canada and US, his films, all of his films are on Criterion except two. His last two, Nostalgia or Nostalgia, I don't know ever how to pronounce that, and The Sacrifice, those are from Kino.
And Kino just put out a nice 4K edition of, is it Nostalgia, isn't it?
Nostalgia, yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully they'll do the other one as well, because it would be nice to get an upgrade on that one as well. So hopefully that will happen soon. But yeah, definitely, folks, just go out and check out any of his films, but definitely Andrei Rublev. Go and check it out. And I think they're all pretty readily available on streaming. Presumably Criterion Channel has it in North America. Yeah. And here I think BFI Player has at least sort of the key titles are on the BFI Player. So they're easily enough to get hold of if you're a streamer.
Yeah, there's it's on YouTube, Google Play, Apple TV, Amazon Prime, and the Curzon channel. So loads of places you can stream it.
Yeah, so pretty easily accessible, and it is a sort of a major key piece of cinema, so it shouldn't be hard to come by. So go and check it out, folks. And speaking of checking things out, Brad, is there anything that you want to have people check out for you, for your work? You mentioned that there's a gallery that's showing some of your artwork.
Yeah, so I have a gallery. It's called Maison de Poivre, and it's just outside of Picton. And they're two great guys who own and run the gallery, Vincent and Christophe, and they represent my work. And so you can find my pieces through their social media and through their website, also through my social media. You can find me on Instagram at Mr. Brad McD. And so you can find images of my work, what I'm working on there, and link to my portfolio as well. And also, if you're interested in sometimes I do letterbox reviews. It's also Mr. Brad McD as well. And you can find me there. I'm also a recurring guest on can I talk about another podcast? I mean,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, just our friend David Blakeslee for the Criterion Reflections podcast. You can hear me as a guest on some of those episodes as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always happy to give a shout out to David Blakeslee. He's come on this show. He did our Gangster Greats episode, and He's a great guy. And his podcast, Criterion Reflections, is, if you love films, I think personally it's the best film podcast out there. And definitely go and check that out. Criterion Reflections, it's called. And Brad has been a frequent guest on there quite often. And you were mentioning before we came on that you just recently were on an episode where you talked about The Harder They Come.
That was the most recent one we did, was the Jamaican film The Harder They Come, where we talked about its influence, its music, and its sort of piece of Jamaican culture. And it was great. It was a great time.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great episode, great film and a great episode. So, David's always great for having really interesting conversations, in depth, very intelligent and thoughtful discussions around really great and interesting films. So definitely go and find that, folks, when you're done listening to Film Swap. Go and listen to Criterion Reflections, because it's terrific as well. And I'll if Brad, if you just want to share some links with me, I'll share them with our listeners in the show notes, so that if people want to go and check out Brad's work, and just go and find him on social media as well. It's definitely worth having a look there as well.
Thank
Brad,
you. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us tonight. It's been really great. It's been a really great conversation.
I had a great time. Thank you guys so much for inviting me. This was fantastic. I was thrilled talking about these films with you guys.
Well, great, and we'd love to have you back another time. So hopefully we'll reach out to you at some point in the future, and maybe have you back, hopefully, to talk about some more cool films.
Absolutely, let me know.
That'd be great.
Brilliant. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, folks who are listening out there, thank you very much for tuning in and listening. And obviously, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think about the films that we talked about tonight, or any of the subjects that we touched on, or anything else that you want to say to us. Really, we're happy to hear from you guys. Thanks again for coming and having a chat, and we'll speak to you soon, hopefully. And folks, we'll see you soon on the next Film Swap.
Thank you.
Bye bye for now.
Bye.
Oh, the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.